In just 73 seconds, 340 billion euros vanished from public oversight. Ursula von der Leyen didn't deny the allegations. She gathered her papers, signaled to her security detail, and walked toward the exit. Cameras captured every moment. The European Parliament froze in absolute silence. What did Viktor Orbán reveal that made the most powerful woman in Europe abandon her own podium? At exactly 2:47 p.m. Brussels time, the unthinkable happened. What began as a routine budget hearing transformed into the biggest financial scandal in EU history. Viktor Orbán didn't bring prepared remarks. He brought evidence. A thick black folder marked Classified Financial Transfers 2024-2026 sat on his desk like a loaded weapon. Von der Leyen approached the podium with her characteristic composed demeanor, unaware that her political career was about to detonate. She wore her signature blue blazer, speaking in measured tones about fiscal responsibility and European unity. But Orbán was watching, waiting. The Commission President began her presentation confidently. The Next Generation EU Fund has successfully allocated $724.2 billion across member states, she announced. Our green transition initiatives continue to show remarkable progress. MEPs scrolled through tablets, reviewing budget spreadsheets, but something was wrong. Orbán's face displayed a knowing smile. He leaned forward, fingers drumming against the black folder. The Hungarian delegation exchanged glances. They knew what was coming. At exactly 2:49 p.m., Orbán requested the floor. The presiding officer, caught off guard, reluctantly granted permission for an intervention. What happened next shattered the foundations of Brussels' power structure. Orbán stood slowly, deliberately. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Madam President," he began, his accent cutting through the chamber's silence, "I have a simple question about the Next Generation Fund you just mentioned." Von der Leyen nodded curtly, expecting a routine policy inquiry. "Can you explain to this Parliament where exactly the $340 billion designated for the Strategic Autonomy Initiative actually went?" The chamber went dead silent. Von der Leyen's composure cracked for a split second. Her hands tightened on the podium edge. The Strategic Autonomy Initiative wasn't supposed to be public knowledge yet. It was buried deep within classified annexes of the 2025 budget framework. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Prime Minister Orbán," von der Leyen replied, but her voice betrayed uncertainty. The confidence was gone. Orbán opened the black folder. Papers rustled in the silence. "Document reference EUSAI 2024-078, he announced, holding up a sheet. "Internal Commission memo dated September 23, 2024. Signed by Budget Commissioner Johannes Hahn and countersigned by yourself, Madam President." The color drained from von der Leyen's face. MEPs began murmuring. Smartphones appeared as journalists started typing furiously. "This document," Orbán continued, "details the creation of a shadow budget mechanism, €340 billion allocated under Article 122 emergency powers, bypassing normal parliamentary oversight." He paused, letting the words sink in. "The funds were designated for strategic defense procurement, but the purchase orders tell a different story." Von der Leyen's jaw clenched. "Prime Minister, I reject any implication of impropriety. All EU spending follows strict legal frameworks." "Then explain this," Orbán shot back, pulling out another document. "Greenberg Strategic Consulting, Delaware, USA. $67.8 billion in contracts signed between January and August 2024. A company that didn't exist before December 2023. His voice rose slightly. "A company whose board of directors includes one Dr. Albrecht von der Leyen." The chamber erupted. Gasps echoed from the public gallery. Von der Leyen's hands began to shake visibly. Dr. Albrecht von der Leyen was her eldest son, a venture capital consultant who had suddenly started advising on European defense matters. "That is a serious allegation without foundation," von der Leyen stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. Sweat appeared on her forehead despite the chamber's cool temperature. Orbán wasn't finished. "Foundation?" He laughed coldly. I have bank transfer records, SWIFT codes, blockchain transaction histories. The paper trail leads from the Commission's emergency fund directly to offshore accounts in Luxembourg, then to Delaware shell companies. He held up a tablet displaying financial charts. 119.4 million for strategic consulting services, 234.7 million for emergency procurement coordination, 89.2 million for crisis management oversight. Each figure hit like a hammer blow. The Hungarian Prime Minister's voice turned ice cold. Madam President, you have been using European taxpayer money to fund your family's business empire under the cover of defending Europe. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Von der Leyen gripped the podium so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her breathing became shallow and visible. The most powerful woman in Europe was cornered. These allegations are, she began, but the words wouldn't come. For the first time in her political career, Ursula von der Leyen was speechless. Orban pressed his advantage. The Strategic Autonomy Initiative was supposed to purchase 450 Patriot missile systems from Raytheon. Instead, the contracts went to a network of consulting firms. No missiles were purchased, no defense capabilities were enhanced. The money simply vanished into private accounts. MEPs from across the political spectrum began demanding answers. Even von der Leyen's traditional allies in the European People's Party sat in stunned silence. Manfred Weber, the EPP chairman, covered his face with his hands. At exactly 2:51 p.m., something unprecedented happened. Von der Leyen's chief of staff, Björn Seibert, approached the podium and whispered urgently in her ear. Security personnel moved closer. The Commission President's security detail activated their communication devices. This session is adjourned, von der Leyen announced suddenly, her voice barely audible. She began gathering her papers with trembling hands. Madam President, Orban called out, you haven't answered the question. Where is the $340 billion I? But von der Leyen was already walking toward the exit. Her security detail formed a protective circle around her. The chamber exploded into chaos. MEPs shouted questions. Journalists rushed toward the exits to file breaking news reports. As the Commission President disappeared through the side door, Orban remained standing at his desk. He held up one final document. For those who want the complete evidence, he announced to the chaos, I have submitted all materials to the European Public Prosecutor's Office. Laura Kövesi will receive 847 pages of financial records tomorrow morning. The implications were staggering. If Orban's allegations were true, the European Commission had operated a massive embezzlement scheme using emergency powers granted during the energy crisis. Billions of euros intended for European defense had been funneled into private companies controlled by the Commission President's family. Within minutes, news alerts flooded smartphones across Europe. Von der Leyen flees Parliament, screamed headlines from Politico. EU Commission scandal trending on social media platforms. The euro dropped 1.2% against the dollar in immediate trading, but the most damaging revelation was yet to come. As MEPs filed out of the chamber, Orban's aide distributed USB drives containing the complete financial evidence. The data showed that the Strategic Autonomy Initiative was just one part of a larger scheme. Other emergency funds had been similarly diverted. The COVID Recovery Fund, $89 billion unaccounted for in consulting contracts. The Green Deal Emergency Response, $156 billion in suspicious procurement deals. The Ukraine Support Mechanism, $67 billion in administrative costs that couldn't be verified. The pattern was clear and devastating. During every crisis, emergency powers had been used to bypass normal oversight. Money had flowed to the same network of consulting firms. The same family name appeared on board positions and advisory roles. European taxpayers had been funding the von der Leyen family's business empire for nearly 4 years, hidden behind emergency programs. The scale of the alleged fraud was unprecedented in modern European history. By evening, emergency sessions were called in capitals across Europe. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz canceled his schedule. French President Emmanuel Macron demanded immediate clarification. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni called for von der Leyen's immediate resignation. The European Public Prosecutor's Office confirmed receipt of Orban's evidence package. Chief Prosecutor Laura Kövesi announced that a formal investigation would begin within 48 hours. If criminal charges were filed, von der Leyen would lose her immunity as Commission President. The mainstream media initially tried to downplay the story, suggesting it was political theater from a known Brussels critic. But the financial documents were too detailed, too comprehensive to dismiss. Bank records don't lie. Blockchain transactions can't be fabricated. Markets across Europe opened in panic mode the following morning. The DAX fell 3.4%. The CAC 40 dropped 2.8%. Italian bonds spiked as investors fled European assets. The credibility of EU institutions had been shattered overnight. But perhaps the most telling response came from Brussels itself. The Commission building went into lockdown mode. Press briefings were cancelled indefinitely. Von der Leyen's office issued only a brief statement denying any wrongdoing but refusing to address the specific allegations. The silence was deafening. In the world of high-stakes politics, silence is not golden. It's an admission of guilt. If the allegations were false, the Commission would have immediately released detailed rebuttals, financial audits, and legal documentation. Instead, there was only panicked silence. Viktor Orbán had done more than expose a financial scandal. He had revealed the fundamental corruption at the heart of the European project. The institutions that claimed to represent European values had been captured by private interests. Democracy had been replaced by technocratic oligarchy. The question now facing Europe was existential. If the Commission president could steal hundreds of billions without oversight, what other crimes were hidden in Brussels' bureaucratic maze? The European Union wasn't just facing a political crisis, it was facing a legitimacy crisis that threatened its very existence. As investigations began and evidence mounted, one truth became undeniable. Viktor Orbán hadn't just exposed Ursula von der Leyen's crimes. He had exposed the entire system's corruption. The mask had fallen, the emperor had no clothes, and 450 million European citizens were finally seeing their leaders' true faces.